part of that role is in the peer partnership. So I'm academic lead for our public involvement in education and research partnership. And part of that means that Kate, who's on the call today, and myself support researchers from right across Bournemouth University in developing funding bids. And our role in that is to make sure that there is some lived experience, public and community involvement in designing that study, shaping that bid, and being involved as co-applicants or supporters of that project. So it means we've got a lot of experience of putting in funding bids to different funders, and some with great success and others without. So there's quite a lot of learning in that, isn't there? Seeing kind of what's successful and what isn't. So I'm just going to provide a bit of a context, a bit of scene setting for the webinar today around research funding. So accessing research funding, we'll look a bit at kind of who the main research funders are and what they fund. You're very familiar with, you're all from voluntary community sector organisations, you know what it's like. My background's in voluntary sector as well. You're constantly looking at getting funding, and you'll know that there are the big hitters with the funders, and then lots and lots of kind of smaller, sometimes more obscure kind of charitable organisations that provide funding to VCSOs. It's very similar in the research world. So if we just go on to the next slide, we've pulled together some of the big hitters. So again, in VCSOs, you know, you'd have the lottery and things like that. These are our kind of big hitters that we apply a lot in health and social care funding too. So UKRI and NIHR are the biggest ones, and they're both government funded in the UK. So UKRI is a whole kind of group of research councils. So there's 7 research councils, like the Economic and Social Research Council, the Arts and Humanities Research Council, engineering, medicine, you know, different kind of councils. It also has Innovate UK and Research England. So they provide millions of pounds of funding every year for research and innovation in the UK. There's also then NIHR, also government funded, and that's essentially the research arm of the NHS. So they're funding a lot of kind of health, clinical trials, testing out different interventions, looking at patient benefit, and they now have a social care strand as well. We also kind of have funders that we go to a lot that are maybe charitable ones. So Wellcome is one of the biggest ones, Nuffield Trust, Leverhulme Trust. So there's charitable organisations that are giving out a huge amount of research funding as well. And then there are the national academies, and probably the most relevant one to us in health and social care is the British Academy, that funds a lot of the kind of research that you might be interested in. If we think about what it is they fund and how they fund, again, similar to kind of voluntary sector funding, with research funding, you might get open calls, so ones that you can just apply for at any time that have a particular criteria of what they're looking for, how much they'll offer, how long that can last for, and you submit that as a case. Often there's a first round, a second round, an interview, and then a decision about funding. But very commonly there are targeted calls, particularly in health and social care research, where there are priority areas where they really kind of, we need to understand more, we need to trial different interventions, and there'll be a specific targeted call, for example, you know, about the uptake of diabetes in South Asian communities or something like that. So something very specific. And those tend to have, or will have, an announcement of when that's going to come out, a date it comes out, a deadline. So you get a little bit of warning, but really you kind of want to be ready to be able to kind of pull something together and put into one of those targeted calls. There's also commissioned research. So certainly at the university, we're commissioned often where we're approached by an external organisation. It might be a charity, it might be a local authority or a health trust or another kind of industry partner asking us to undertake a piece of research on their behalf, and they'll fund us to do that. And knowledge exchange kind of fits within that as well. So that's a process and a framework for universities to collaborate with external partners to explore ideas and innovation. And the different partners, including community partners, would be funded as part of that framework. So just to give you an idea of the types of kind of research funding that we're talking about. What's particularly interesting for this series of webinars is all of those funders and others have all set priorities around quality, diversity and inclusion, the inclusive research agenda, and partnership working. So there's things that we've talked about in webinars 1 and 2. They've absolutely made this a priority. So they've made it a requirement of funding bids. So researchers are absolutely going to be coming to you in the voluntary sector organisation, probably have already, to collaborate on research bids, because it's now an expectation and a requirement that we have that partnership working in order to address equality, diversity and inclusion in research. Just pulled out a couple of examples from those sort of big hitter kind of funders. So Wellcome, which is the biggest sort of charitable research funder, millions awarded in grants every year. We're committed to making health research open to anyone with a great idea and removing any barriers that people may face. So they're really wanting to broaden out who it is leading on research. Wellcome cannot achieve its vision to support science to solve urgent health challenges facing everyone unless structural inequalities are corrected. We know that we have played our part in perpetuating and reinforcing these inequalities. This needs to change urgently. So they're doing a lot of work to try and enact that first sentence around how can they involve a much wider range of people in research by removing some of the barriers. Second example, UKRI that I mentioned, they've kind of talked about, we will work with partners to shape a dynamic, diverse and inclusive system of research and innovation in the UK that is an integral part of society, giving everyone the opportunity to participate and to benefit. So again, this big push to collaborate with you, people and communities in research. And then the final one is one that I shared in webinar 2. So NIHR, that kind of research arm of the NHS, made it a requirement last month for all applicants, regardless of if it's in their open calls or their targeted calls, all now have a section where applicants have to demonstrate how their research will address existing inequalities in health and social care as a condition of that funding. And you'll see from the diagram there that they're wanting to be more inclusive, they're wanting to build more partnerships, they're wanting to collaborate with more people on research. So again, they're really kind of putting the money where their mouth is in terms of wanting these partnerships and collaborations. As just a final example in terms of that sort of putting the money where their mouth is, they got a lot of feedback about how, yes, but it takes time and it takes resources. So there's been a few funding pots and we've successfully received some of these around funding to develop research partnerships and community research partnerships. So, for example, NIHR back in 2021 developed the Research Ready community programme. So there were community groups around the country building capacity about how they could have a voice in research. We successfully got a programme development grant. So that's a whole pot of funding for researchers to undertake prep work to develop a future programme of research. So it's that kind of 6 months prior to putting in a bid to be able to fund and collaborate with community organisations and other partners to build a really strong kind of research team and break down some of the barriers and enablers around that. And that actually started off at 150,000 and they've recently increased that pot to awards of up to 250,000. So they have very specific calls as well for funding to develop diverse and innovative partnerships that we've been successful on. We have one that's around cancer aware, trans aware cancer care that came from that funding pot. A reminder of why. So this is about increasing the diversity of who participates in research, who designs research and who conducts research, because it's recognised that that's the only way we're going to really address inequalities in health and social care. But there's a challenge. There's always a challenge, isn't there? So this is kind of where we feel we're up to. The funders are genuinely committed to this. They're committed to quality, diversity and inclusion. They're genuinely committed to partnership working. They've put funding in place. They've made it a requirement. But they still don't quite know what that looks like in practice, or it's not yet quite clear. And we're still really guiding on what best practice looks like around that. The reality is that community-led research doesn't really score well still at funding panels, and most funding bids are unsuccessful. So that's what we're really working on changing. And I think it comes from a whole background of them expecting to see clinical trials and clinical research and assess the academic rigour of that, and not quite adjusting yet to how different that would look like if it was community led. The systems and processes are still difficult to navigate, so we may now have research ready communities. We certainly know there's lots of interest in the VCSOs we work with to be involved, but the systems make that really difficult. So as a challenge, we're not quite there yet in terms of community ready researchers or research systems, but we're working on it. This is where you come in. So voluntary and community sector, you can be and are and need to be a really strong voice in driving this change and showing what good looks like, as developing more and more successful bids in order to show that track record and show what a strong bid looks like. So just last couple of slides, thinking about the role of the voluntary and community sector. We need to build research teams which harness all different types of expertise. So academic, clinical, practice and lived experience expertise. Those are the funding bids that are going to be successful. It's not just in the way that we don't just want research that's led by academics. It also won't necessarily work to have research that's just led by community groups. It's about building these expert, diverse teams. We need to develop research projects based on equal partnership for equal benefit. So we're really trying to challenge that extraction model that we've touched on before, where researchers come to you, extract a load of information and take it off who knows where. Actually, how can you really hold your own, be an equal partner in that space and make sure that it works for you and is of benefit to you? We need to work with the research funders to develop the structures and processes to facilitate this. And then this last one, and this is where we're really hoping this work and the work of can come in, which is we need to build strong community research networks and partnerships which are successful in securing research funding. And that's partly what we're looking at today and we'll be looking at in the workshops. So just onto the final slide, again, just where we're up to in the REM project is we're now on phase 3, but it's absolutely with that in mind. So we're looking to build wider VCS capacity and capability to engage in research and extend our kind of community-led approach to wider groups at risk of exclusion. So we are successfully involving a much wider range of people in the research that we're doing, and that we're successful in using your time, involving you, creating collaborations which are successful in obtaining research funding. Thanks, Paul. Back to you.
Thanks, Mel. That was excellent. Okay, at this point, I'm going to bring in colleagues Mike Graham and Siobhan. Mike is CEO of the Lantern Trust, and Siobhan represents Health and Kindness. So over to you. And Kate, sorry, Kate as well. My apologies.
No, absolutely. Thank you, Paul. And you're absolutely right. I'm just introducing this section. So I'm Kate. I'm from Bournemouth University Peer Partnership, and my role is supporting very much around supporting community-led research and bringing together community organisations and research to develop some of those partnerships that Mel has touched on in her earlier slides. So Mike and Siobhan, could you each introduce yourself and your role in the organisations, particularly perhaps reflecting around the topic today of funding? Mike, to you first, if I may.
Of course. My name's Mike Graham. I'm the Lantern Trust CEO. We, over the last 2 to 3 years at the Lantern Trust, have really understood the impact and benefits of what the collaborations that research can bring. REN is one of the projects we're involved in, alongside a joint one with some colleagues that are on the call today with UKRI. And it's really given us an opportunity to kind of share the voice of our customers in a much more beneficial way to them. One of the first things that we started with is the so whats and the what ifs. And one of the really clear points of that is, when our customers, clients, service users are sharing their voice, how do we ensure they have the greatest impact in, ensuring that we're bringing them to the right area? So the research funding and the opportunities it gave obviously helped us add a lot of evidence to what we were doing, but also to share the voice of our customers. So yeah, it's been an incredible opportunity.
Thanks, Mike. Over to you, Siobhan.
Oh, thank you so much. So I am part of the WREN project, as Mike mentioned, but I'm also part of something that's called the Weymouth and Portland Community Research Network. And I really hope that I can be helpful today to just give you a little tiny case study of what this kind of flipping the power, community-led research can look like. So some time ago, we had a small group of people who were researchers and activists who wrote a report that was focused on South Dorset. And through that, we made connections with Bournemouth University. And this was really timely because it coincided with some work that the UKRI were doing in conjunction with the Young Foundation and their Institute of Community Studies, which really looked at how inequitable the research landscape looks. And how that needed to change. They really began to recognise that the kind of extraction model, you know, where large research institutions might come into a community, do a bit of research and then take it away, that really needed to change. And one of the key things that they recognised was about the kind of long-term building of relationships between, say, for example, voluntary sector organisations and perhaps a university or the NHS, in order to conduct more equitable research that could even and hopefully would be led by some of the voluntary sector organisations themselves. It was about, you know, where does knowledge come from and who is producing that knowledge and whose knowledge is valued in the research field. And actually many voluntary sector organisations, as you will all know, are already conducting their own research and doing it very well, thank you. And it was about kind of valuing that. So it came at a time when they wanted to develop a model of community research networks, and they funded several around the country to kind of capacity build and do some pilot studies of running their own research, for example, and also to build a network. So we came together with the Lantern Trust, also Ireland Community Action, who are a very strong voluntary sector organisation based on Portland, and also Steps Club for Young People, which is one of the only surviving full-time youth services in the South Dorset area at that time. And we were able to take the lead on putting the bid together to form this community research network. And we were very lucky to also be able to link in with Bournemouth University at that time. And we then spent 18 months, we were successful for the first phase, 18 months of really beginning to look at what does this mean for us? What does it mean to be research ready? What does it mean to actually engage on, for example, research funding bids? How can we actually either take the lead on that or certainly make sure that we are the strongest voice at the table? So it was a really fantastic opportunity, and one that I think we were able to kind of demonstrate to the UKRI how a group of charities could come together with the help of Bournemouth University, but actually they hadn't, although they were all aware of each other, the different charities, and they knew each other and they knew the work that they did, and they may well come together for other, service provision, but actually they hadn't come together in terms of what does research look like and how can we conduct it. So it was a really great opportunity that has actually led to further opportunities down the line. It gave us a kind of strength, and I really hope that this is also where we're headed now, based on the discussions that we're having in the webinars, in the workshops, that it can actually be that that we can start the processes, we can look out for the funding, and we can also take a lead on what the research might look like if, for example, the universities or NIHR come to us and say, can you be involved in this research? We can say, yes, we can, but these are some of the things that we've learned and this is how it might look. So I hope that's helpful.
Yeah, thank you, Siobhan. And both of you have touched on the real strength of partnerships when they work, and that the community voice is central and has a lead in those partnerships, and around that flipping the power. So my next question to you is, we heard from Mel what the funders are saying, so that they are committed to making research funding open and inclusive. I wonder if you could share from your recent experiences of how you've navigated research funding and perhaps some of the challenges that can present. Mike, to you first, if I may.
I guess challenges and opportunities I'd use in the same breath. I
Mhm.
mean, one of the key facets of what we've done with two or three of the projects that we've been involved in when it comes to research is the fact that they can sometimes feel that it doesn't come with huge amounts of structure. And I think with the third sector, I can be very good at voicing, hey, we want to be more involved. And then when you are, it can be a challenge because we walked into this really exciting environment of genuinely being able to flip the power to encourage people to become researchers with a lived experience of homelessness. And what that obviously brought was the fact that we didn't necessarily have a roadmap of what that was going to look like because it was genuinely created from the ground up, as it were. And that can be an exciting opportunity, but I know talking to Tanya and other people within my team, it can also feel overwhelming at times. So, it's just to really acknowledge that. Um, the Lantern's kind of embedded itself within integrated neighbourhood teams. So the way that we've always operated has been around sharing the voice of our customers at the highest table. So for Bournemouth University and others to kind of add credence to that, and that's had a huge impact on our customers to actually know that not only is their voice important in service delivery and the creation of, but that an academic institution is genuinely interested in what they have to say and that they, being the people that use services, have a larger say in power. And I guess from a power dynamic perspective, that's always been something that our customer group represent a really marginalized part of society. And so actually, it's not just the fact that the funding's brought exciting opportunities and it's got them involved, but it's actually heightened and added value to the fact that they actually feel listened to, seen, and heard. And I guess I underestimated the impact that could have with different people. And speaking to the researchers I have been over the last couple of weeks, that's been quite seismic to them. So yeah, an amazing, exciting opportunity, but also overwhelming at times just because of the exciting nature of what the funding brought.
Thanks, Mike. And there's something there that around sort of building capacity within your organisation, and also that coming together as a voluntary and community sections, community organisations together. From what Siobhan was saying, that are coming together and building momentum as a group widely across Dorset. Same question to you, Siobhan. Some of the challenges navigating funding.
So I don't really have to tell this to all of you working in the voluntary sector how hard it is when you're seeking funding for anything. The pot is often small and the competition is large. So it will come with its disappointments, I can assure you, when you're not successful. What I would say though is that any bid that you're putting in, it always gives you an opportunity to either reuse the work that you've done, so it's never wasted, and it's also really important to sustain your network going forward. So even if you're not successful in something, that doesn't mean there won't be another opportunity that you could make use of the work that you've done. I think what is problematic is that whilst I recognise the real commitment from the large research organisations to making research more equitable, I think we have to face the reality that actually what we're asking of the voluntary sector is to be research ready. Well, how do you do that when you're not funded? So perhaps it's a question that we have to pose in return. Yes, this is absolutely where we should be headed, but the work, the commitment that you then put in terms of making the applications is a considerable one. And it's about finding that capacity within the work organisation. I think the plus side to that is that if you're bigger, if you're a network and you're linking up with others, you can share that. And I think that's where the kind of relationship building really comes into it, and why the Weymouth and Portland network has been successful is that we've maintained those relationships and we've enhanced them. And where I see, the future of what we're discussing here, is that, we can build those networks and then work together and collaborate on projects, because it shouldn't just be a kind of contested ground where we're all just trying to be sharp-elbowed about it. It should be a much more relational way of working.
Thanks, Siobhan, and that real emphasis there on collaboration, working together, partnerships, networks, and really important. Thank you. So you've highlighted, both of you, some of the challenges, but both organisations, Helping Kindness and the Lantern Trust, have been successful. You've touched on that in research, in gaining funding. What would you say some of the keys to success have been, Mike?
Key to success as to why we were positioned, and successful in funding has been the bringing together of, we live in a very challenging age, and I think it's challenging for lots of groups in society, but also from a funding perspective that Siobhan's already touched on. And I think coming together to really co-create something has been a really exciting opportunity, but it also shows that you're not duplicating what other partners are doing. There is a local strength to everything that we do, and you can't be all things to all people. And I think we really evidence that coming together and joining up our offers, as Siobhan's already touched on from a UKRI perspective, Island Community Action, STEPS, and the Lantern Trust, we really evidence that we done, that joining up of things locally, and that, was a success. I guess the fact that we're all very much community organisations that already operate in our neighbourhoods, as it were, we're already integrated into our communities. And I think that part of it has been a real strength. So, yeah, it's the coming together of and the joining up of what's already existing. I think from a funding perspective, when you're looking at the different community organisations that are involved, I would want to see that we have done a little bit of the heavy lifting. And I think that's the strength of what charities can bring, how flexible they can be, how fluid they can be, and how quickly we can kind of come together and collaborate on really exciting projects.
Brilliant. Thank you, Mike. Siobhan, same question to you. Key to success.
So I think it's about, as Mike was alluding to anyway, really, it's about recognising that you already have the knowledge, actually, and you've already got things that you can build on, and that we, voluntary sector organisations are exactly the right people to be undertaking any research that is community based in this way, because that's where they are. They're at the heart of the community. And I always think back to Chris Whitty's report about health inequalities that was done a couple of years ago, and they were looking at the kind of data around health inequalities, and what the kind of summary at the end was that we're lacking the kind of granular detail, the granular information that is needed. We can have the broad kind of statistics around things, but actually what's really going on, and voluntary sector organisations, are best placed to kind of fill that and find out that information, and probably already have it. So we're absolutely in the right place to be doing this, and that's where I think the key to success is, that actually we have, voluntary sector has the rightful place in the research landscape, and people need to be respecting that and going to them to find out what knowledge they already have or what they could build on.
Thank you, Siobhan. I'm just going to pick up on something that you said, if I may. Both of you have said that about, your best place there. You're already doing this amazing work, and the community organisations, and you have that knowledge. The community organisations on the webinar today are also doing, invaluable work, best place, have this knowledge. What is it, perhaps linking to specific projects, that can convert that knowing into the confidence of stepping forward and being involved in research? What supports that sort of change, that taking action step? And Mike, to you.
It's acknowledging the great work we're already doing. I think we undersell ourselves in the charitable sector. We often almost take for granted the amazing work that we do. And I think that the brave step of stepping forward to say we are experts, our customers are experts, is the first step. It's acknowledging that we do know a lot. We are embedded in our communities. We are already a community-based model in the sense that we literally exist within our communities, and that's been naturally formed over many years. So it's kind of acknowledging our strengths. And I guess celebrating it. I mean, that was the journey I was on when Bournemouth University and others first showed an interest in what the Lantern was doing. It's like, well, little old us. But the actual truth of the matter is we've been doing this type of work for many, many years. So the brave first step is acknowledging the great work we're already doing. And then it's like sharing best practice. It's coming together in a non-competitive way, because ultimately we all get out of bed in the mornings to try and make the world a better place in very small ways. So, you know, I think it is really around celebrating the wonderful tapestry, as I call it, the rich tapestry of the third sector, which is we are fluid, we're flexible, we're built and based on need. And I think it's acknowledging and celebrating that.
Lovely, thank you, Mike. And Siobhan, something there that Mike talked about is really making it work for the community organisation. Can you just perhaps give an example from a project you've been involved in and how it has on the ground really worked for your community organisation?
So I think the Wren project that we're engaged with at the moment, and with Mike as well, is a really excellent example of a truly community researcher-led way of working. And I think it's been exciting because it's a cross-fertilization of ideas. So you've got the work of BU, which has been invaluable in developing this model, but also the ideas of the community researchers themselves and the voluntary sector organisations that we've been working with. It's been of equal partnership, the way this has developed, and that in itself is exciting, because the ideas that have emerged and the model that is emerging, and you know, when for example the stakeholder events that have been run, they've always been about how do we do this collaboratively, how do we make it work for everybody, how can people take part. You know, it's been a really refreshing experience, I think, for many who up until now perhaps we find research in the community is often, okay, we're going to come in and find out your ideas and then write a report and then put it on a shelf. And so to be involved in this has been enormously refreshing and eye-opening, and a positive experience, one which I hope people will take away great learning from, both in terms of the research world and also the voluntary sector world, and for all those with lived experience who've taken part.
Thank you. Thank you both for your contributions in this section. I'm going to hand back to Paul now. But absolutely, I'm sure that you'll both be ready to answer any questions and be part of the discussion in the final section. So Paul, thank you, and over to you.
Thank you very much. That was a really lovely presentation as well. Chris, could I just ask you to end the recording at this point before we open up to the Q&A session?